everyone. Let us begin with a little Sufi remembrance, courtesy of the Sufi master of our Sufi order, Sheikh Nazim al-Haqqani. I've done this before. If you'll just follow me, we'll do it twice. Allah, 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 Kareem Allah, 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 Aziz Allah, 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 Subhanallah, Allah, 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 Sultan Allah. Thank you very much. Now, that was a great performance. I swore I heard that same number at the Mos Eisley Cantina on my last visit to Tatooine. Jabba's band was performing that night, so. Well, thank you very much. On December, we had a wonderful retreat in Virginia on Star Wars, and we called it the Sage's Journey. And it actually coincided with the premiere of Episode 9, The Rise of the Skywalker. So we did a few sessions, and then we went all together and we watched the premiere in the theaters. And because I know many of you probably haven't watched Episode 9, or maybe you have, I'll try not to venture into that territory. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we sort of, some of the epiphanies that we sort of had in that retreat. And first, I want to sort of talk about why is Star Wars so important, right? I mean, Star Wars, Episode 4 came out in the 70s, and now it's a multi-generational phenomenon in the United States, right? There was a great book by John Caputo called On Religion. And he talks about his daughter. He says, when my daughter went to college, her roommate had a big Star Wars poster in the room. And it said, everything I need to know about life, I learned from Star Wars. Right? Everything I need to know about life, I learned from Star Wars. Now, a little bit of the background to Star Wars. Of course, Star Wars, the story, the universe was created by George Lucas. George Lucas was actually a student of Joseph Campbell, who wrote the Hero's Journey, or The Hero, A Thousand Faces, and then, of course, The Power of Myth. And it's actually a result of Joseph Campbell's teachings that Lucas went forward and created this phenomenon called Star Wars. And both Caputo, Joseph Campbell, and Lucas say the same thing. When they asked Lucas in an interview about why he did Star Wars, he says, look, Star Wars is basically ancient ideas. They're very ancient, traditional motifs. I just dress them in a modern form. And that is the key for what religion needs to survive. If you don't do that, people will look for meaning elsewhere. And Lucas understood that. In a very powerful moment, Bill Moyers asks Lucas, he says, so is the Force God? Is this what you're trying to sort of talk about? He says, I am less worried when I ask a young person, do you believe in God? And they say no, than if they were to say, I never thought about it. He says, I'm really worried that the young generation in our day are not thinking about deep questions. What is truth? What is reality? What is faith? What is spirituality? What is good and what is evil? Right? And that's the same thing that Joseph Campbell says. Joseph Campbell's idea in The Power of Myth is that the same things that animated the Parthenon on Mount Olympus for the ancient Greeks are reoccurring in our lifetime. They have not disappeared. We go to watch Star Wars, we go to watch Avengers, and the ancient Greeks went to the Parthenon. Because why? Because they wanted to feel larger than life. They wanted to feel like their existence in this world actually had a larger meaning. And again, if religions and religious leaders are able to provide that, which means that you actually have to translate your scripture. You cannot simply read your scripture and assume people will get meaning out of it. After all, God had translated what cannot be expressed in language into language in the first place. But it came down at a particular moment in time. And the timelessness of Scripture is its ability to be translated. Its ability of the Spirit to be translated in infinite forms, one for every age. So, for me as a Muslim, when I watch Star Wars, I find it to be a perfect tafsir or exegesis of the Quran. That's actually what a modern exegesis would look like. Not only reading the Quran by itself, it has to have relevance in our everyday in life. So Lucas, that's also his idea. Joseph Campbell, that's his idea. And John Caputo, he says, look, if you look at a character like Anakin Skywalker, you're seeing a play on Christ and the crucifixion. Anakin, as we know from episode 1, he was born without a father. Right? In that famous scene where Qui-Gon Jinn, the Jedi Master, he asks Shmi Skywalker, who's Anakin's mother, he was like, who was his father? And she says, there was no father. I conceived him, I gave birth to him. And they explain it in the language of the Force. He says the Force is very strong with him. And then they play on science by explaining that the Force is correlated with this idea of midichlorians. Right? They're molecules that tie everything together in the universe. I mean, it's like you're watching everything that ever mattered about faith and traditions lumped into modern mythology. And that's why people are interested in it. The other reason, and this is part of the genius of George Lucas, I think, is that he opened the door for fan fiction. I know Muslims who've written fan fiction of a Sufi Jedi Master living in the universe of Star Wars. And they get to interact with all the Jedi Knights that are living in that galaxy. And the fact that it's called, in a galaxy far, far away, or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it makes it seem like we can actually access that it's actually happening, that we can maybe travel through time and participate in that story. Right? Now, one of the things that George Lucas always talks about, he says Star Wars is about fathers and sons. That's really what it's about for him. Right? Anakin has to be redeemed by his son Luke. Right? The remarkable thing about Star Wars is that when you look, some people have talked about the original script of episodes 4, 5, and 6. And throughout, in all the original scripts, Anakin was always written as Darth Vader. Until that last scene in episode 6, when he's redeemed by Luke, and he takes off his mask, and Luke tells him, Father, I have to save you. And he says, oh, but son, you already have. That line in the script is written as said by Anakin Skywalker. That Darth Vader has died. The evil reincarnation has died, and now he's back to Anakin. What I think is amazing about the new trilogy, at least episodes 7 and 8, is that now Luke has to be redeemed. Right? And we see that in episode 6. Because what happens in episode 6 is, episodes 4 and 5, Luke is dressed in white, which is the dress of the Jedi. Right? He's wearing the white cloth of the Jedi, white and brown. And then in episode 6, throughout the episode, he's dressed in black, which is the color of the Sith. And actually, Lucas was very specific about colors, the color choice in Star Wars. In an interview, he said, if you ever look at the Empire, like the Stormtroopers and Emperor Palpatine and the Death Star, it's all very stark contrast between black, white, or just very dull gray. There is no vibrancy of colors. And that's, of course, meant to mimic this idea that Sith deal in absolutes. You're either with me or against me, which Lucas had mentioned. This was very much a play on the politics of the early 2000s, when somebody was saying, you're either with us or against us. And, Lucas was playing on that. But, with Luke, we see this dress code, this color, black color throughout Return of the Jedi. That the temptation of the darkness is there. And I think this is really important for us. The lesson that you don't get to be a perfect hero. We all have our trials. And we can never relate to a hero that's not tempted, that doesn't have struggles. One of the things that's mentioned in the Quran that's really remarkable is that God is addressing a question that the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, or a problem they had. They said, why is God sending us a human being? Why doesn't He send us an angel to preach to us, to deliver the message? They say, what kind of prophet is this? He walks in the marketplace and he eats food. And God responds to them, He says, well, if there were angels walking upon the earth, we would have sent them an angel. But you are human beings. So we have to send you a human being, not only who will feel your pain, but one you can actually imitate. One you can actually feel a source of intimacy with, right? And this idea of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talks about is that the hero has to go through struggles. There has to be suffering in order for the redemption to feel meaningful, right? There has to be suffering in order for the redemption to feel meaningful. One of the early exegetes of the Quran, commenting on the fall from Eden, gave a really beautiful commentary. He said, look, it's as if he's addressing Adam and Eve. He says, you're given paradise from the get-go. That's not the journey of the lover. The lover has to struggle. And once you struggle through love, your high station at the end is going to be higher than this paradise. It's going to be nearness to truth. It's going to be immersion in oneness. So we see Luke go through that journey where he's completely tempted by the dark side, to the degree that he was almost going to kill his father. And of course, Palpatine is there as the voice of the snake, right? Playing that role perfectly. And then at the end, and this happens throughout Star Wars, once submission comes, right? Submission to the Force, then that's when triumph happens. So Luke drops his lightsaber and he just addresses the Emperor and he says, you have failed. I am a Jedi like my father before me. And it's really remarkable when he says that, I am a Jedi like my father before me, it's as if he activated something in his father. There is a really remarkable story where a cancer patient went to a mystic for prayers, to pray for them. And when they went there, the person who brought them, they said, this person has cancer. And he looked at them and he said, no, they don't. They don't have cancer. He says, what do you mean? We just came from the doctor. They said they have. He said, no, I can't see any cancer there. And when they went to the doctor, the cancer was gone. So when they went back to the guide, he said, there is two ways to heal. There is either active healing, which is you acknowledge the sickness and then you try and heal it, or you deny, you undo it from within. You deny it ever existed. And through that, you withdraw its power away from it. And that's sort of what Luke was doing. He said, I am a Jedi. My father is not a Sith. My father is a Jedi. And when he did that, it's as if Anakin was reborn. The other point that's really powerful about Star Wars, returning to the idea of religion, is that, you have this guy, Palpatine, the Dark Lord of the Sith. He was able to cloud the judgment of all the top Jedis. And this is really one of the things I think that struck Luke Skywalker to the core. In Episode 8, The Last Jedi, this new young kid on the block, Rey, she wants to be a Jedi. So what is she doing? She's trying to reason with Luke. You're secluding yourself on this island. Come and teach me. And what does he say to her? He said, the Jedi are hypocritical. The Jedi Order is hypocrisy. Why? They allowed a Dark Lord of the Sith to rise from amongst them. To rise right in between them. They were clouded by the dark side of the Force. And I think the key here, and what's great about that episode, is that Luke is hesitating. There lie all the books of the Jedi Order. Tradition, as a whole, was there in a dark room. And Luke was hesitating. Should I burn it? Should I destroy it? What is the point of all of this? And he's hesitating. And who appears from the Force in order to burn those books? Master Yoda. Out of all people, Master Yoda himself, the head of the Jedi Order, burns the entire books to flames. And then Luke, he looks at him, he's like, what's happening? He's like, you think the Jedi is only in books? You think that's what the Jedi Order is all about? In the cartoon series, there is a cartoon series, multiple ones. Star Wars Rebels takes place after the fall of the Republic. And they find this holocron, which is like a recording, that Obi-Wan Kenobi left right after the Republic fell. And it is one of the most beautiful moments in the Star Wars universe. He says, this is a message. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi. And this is a message for any remaining Jedi. I leave you this with the sad news that the Republic has fallen and our Jedi Order has fallen with the rise of the evil empire. He says, do not go back to the Jedi Temple. That time is over. He says, trust in the Force. He says, trust in friendship. Trust in each other. He says, in due time, and you hope will rise. And of course, that's the title of episode 4, which is Luke Skywalker. The idea here is that the Jedi Order fell because they could not think outside of their books. They could not relate to reality. What made Emperor Palpatine successful was he took the darkness of the Sith, as dark as it was, and he dressed it in politics. He knew how to play the role. What a genius. He played two armies against one another, and he was benefiting from both. He knew he played the game, so to say. The Jedi were clouded not by the dark side of the Force. They were clouded by their own tradition. They could not cope with the times. And unfortunately, we are seeing something similar with not religions, but the way religions are taught. We are seeing this gap. I mean, essentially what happened to the Jedi Order is the same reason, or is the same thing that happened to world religions, and it's the same reason that Lucas created Star Wars. Because people are looking for meaning. I mean, what's the importance, looking from a Christian point of view, what is the importance of the story of the Annunciation or the crucifixion for our day and time? What is the importance of the ascension in the Islamic tradition? Ascending to the seventh heaven and coming back. What is the importance of all of that if we cannot relate it in a modern form? And so you have so many themes, so many motifs in Star Wars, but really it boils down to these two things. The idea that no matter how great your tradition is, if we are not doing the work of translating it and keeping it relevant for our day and age, then people will look elsewhere. It doesn't matter how great you see it. You have to translate that. I mean, just as an artist, when they have an inspiration inside of them and they don't work hard to translate it into expression, it can kill them. And religions can die too, if the custodians of that religion do not work hard on translating the meanings into a new form for every age. And the other idea, of course, is this fathers and sons. And you know what's great about the theme of fathers and sons is that this play of what happens when the biological father is absent. What happens when the biological father is not there to perform their role? Then a different father figure will come. Anakin would eventually be called son by Palpatine in episodes 2 and 3. Right up until the end when he actually becomes his master. Right? He calls him son. The Jedi Council does not trust you. Son, the Jedi Order does not believe in you. And then what does that lead to? That leads to the birth of Darth Vader. And the same thing now in episode 8, Luke tells Rey something remarkable. He says, relationships by blood is not the only type of relationship there is. There is also spiritual genealogies. There is also spiritual parents. There are spiritual siblings. There are spiritual children that you can have. Right? And in this sense, and you know, so in episodes 4, 5, and 6, it's about the children redeeming the parents. Luke redeeming his father. In episodes 7 and 8, specifically episode 7, it's about Han Solo trying to redeem his son. Right? Who had turned to the dark side and he was trying to redeem him. And then again, just as Luke redeemed his father in episode 6, now Rey is trying to redeem Luke. And then this actually, and you know, the powerful thing is, as we talked about, is that being a hero comes with its struggles. Being a hero comes with its suffering. But look at the great realizations that Luke had as a result of his seclusion. He reached the conclusion that the Jedi were wrong. They're not, balance in the Force is not reached when you just destroy the Sith. He says you submit to the Force and you trust that the Force will bring balance to itself. So much of what's happening right now in the environment is nature correcting itself. Because we are abusing it. So it's not seeking out to destroy us, it's just seeking out to bring balance to the Force. That's essentially what it's doing. And yes, that means that harm will come to us unless we become proactive. Right? That's the way the Force works. So Luke tells Rey, he says, the Force brings balance to itself. Just as you have life, you have death. Just as you have the light side of the Force, you have the dark side of the Force. And so the journey that Luke went through to redeem his father, the dark side was with him. He might have even carried the burden of his father, and it was torturing him. So the redemption needed to continue with Rey. And so in conclusion, we see that this is the power of art and mythology and spirituality. The importance of Star Wars, I mean, you can make 100 more episodes and people will still go and watch it. Right? Because, again, we like to feel within us that we are part of something greater. This is why mythology is important. Right? This is why mythology is necessary for our day and life. One of the greatest crises that has struck religion specifically is that we have forgotten about the ancient way of telling stories. And not only telling stories, but encouraging believers to write their own stories. In light of that magnificent universe, we have disenchanted our universe. And Star Wars is there to enchant it again. Thank you very much.
I wonder what the significance of Ray being
Yes.
a female.
Yes.
Do you have any more to say about that?
I mean, you know, one of the main things that gets lost when religion loses its ancient footing is the power of the feminine symbol and the power of woman. Because, you know, I mean, Sufi mystics all the time talk about the divine feminine. That it's actually a very deep and it's synonymous with divine ruse. So it's like the relationship of the loving human being and the beloved God. That once that relationship is activated, then God behaves like a feminine beloved. You have to seek her, right? Like a Romeo and Juliet kind of theme and motif. But I think with Ray, and I'm going to try not to spoil anything because this is completely episode 9, but she is the only one who is able to bring this story to an end. She is the only one who is really able to bring balance to the Force, and I'm going to end there. So in the trailer for episode 9, Luke, he says a beautiful line. He says, the story ends here, or the journey ends, but the story lives forever, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think the way the story lives forever is that this is where we actually begin to think about where all these characters are inside of us, right? So who is my inner Luke? Who is my inner Anakin? Who's my inner Darth Vader? Who's my inner Palpatine? Because all of that has to reside inside of us. I mean, that entire universe is somewhere deep inside George Lucas. All of it. Because that's the only place where it can... And the new trilogy comes out from within these filmmakers. And that's a deep, very ancient mystical idea, too, that whatever we do outside, whatever we perceive outside, whatever we externalize is coming from within. So the great thing about art is that an artist is giving you their inner universe, and then you're taking that as a mirror to reflect on your inner universe. And it's like a back and forth relationship. And so that's really where the story begins, right? For us. Is that who is my inner Anakin? Sometimes I see him coming out. Sometimes I see a Darth Vader coming out. Sometimes I see an Emperor Palpatine coming out. Or sometimes I see, you know, a Luke or so on and so forth. And why? And to ask ourselves, even when we go and watch, I mean, just this idea of a conference where people go dressed as Star Wars characters. I remember watching a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, where a father had been going as a Jedi, and he belonged to a fan club of Jedi Order for maybe 10 years. And his son, after, you know, he grew up, he decided he wanted to be a Sith. And it was a trauma. And I think, I mean, as they were sitting there looking at each other and the father was weeping genuinely, you can tell that this is the way they're able to deal with who they are. I mean, this is really finding meaning. Although, if you just look at it at the surface, it's kind of funny, but it's really this deep, like they feel like they belong to this larger universe. And any form, any mythology that's able to do that, I think it's important. That's probably, you know, the greatest line in that scene, and probably in all of the greatest Yoda line ever in the Star Wars universe, is when Luke tells him, "I don't believe it," and he says, "That is why you fail." Right? It's so simple. He's like, you think that this is magical, that I'm lifting a ship out of a swamp and moving it on land. He's like, "I don't believe it." He's like, "That is why you fail. Is because you can't believe. If you were to believe, then, you know, you can accomplish anything." Yes, do or do not. There is no try. Well, we need a Lord of the Rings sermon. Maybe that'll be the next one. I'm actually giving a Lord of the Rings retreat in April. And I'm in the process of reading the books right now. But Wow. Well, I mean, Tolkien was even more remarkable, you know, in terms of his own spiritual journey. But yeah, I think Aragorn, the Ranger, who comes from a long line of kings, prophets, divine people, who's promised the throne as a king, and has to go through that entire struggle to reach the throne, and he needs help. That's just because you're destined to be king doesn't mean that you don't need help. And who does he need the help of? And that's in the Return of the King. They bow down to hobbits out of all creatures. You know, there is in the movie, and I discovered that it's not in the book actually, but maybe it's in the Lord of the Rings book. But there is a beautiful scene where the Galadriel, the she-elf queen, she asks Gandalf, she's like, "Why Bilbo? Why a hobbit?" He says, because when I see a young creature like this show such courage, he says, Saruman thinks it takes great power to keep darkness at bay. He says, but I did not find it to be that way. I found it in the little things. And so when I see a creature like Bilbo, a hobbit, able to show such courage, I have courage, right? And this is a wizard. And so I think this is also the perception of Jesus and the prophets in general, divine people, is they're able to see the force in the weakest thing on earth. But yeah, the story is completely Christic.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you so much.